Trying to empathy. So first of all, again, thanks for coming out this evening, and this is the first of our public hearings. And so, you know, if we didn't answer all the questions, we can revamp for the next one. So it's kind of our starter session, but we hope today to provide some information, to get questions, you know, and begin that process of conversations of what this would look like, and ultimately, if this is right for the district. I mean, so you have to know that this is not one of those things that I would say that we put on the floor that think it's ready to go. We're just waiting for you to approve it and off it goes. We're really not there. This was a concept that we try to put together and ultimately would go through some iterations and really a final decision on what that's going to be if we move forward. We do know this, in short, we have to choose by July 1 of three statuses. We have to choose either status quo, which I've said is really status quo. We don't change. We don't get flexibility. You are what you are, is what it is, doesn't change. The I squared is a contract with the governor's office that says we'll give you flexibility in exchange for you have to have performance targets. It's a straight contract. And the charter system essentially says that what we're going to do is that we're going to give you flexibility in exchange for governance. So that's the difference. The charter system is around local governance. So I'm Phil, new superintendent.
Tim Jarbo, Director of Assessment, Accountability, and Instructional Services.
James Parliament, Coordinator for Career.
And Mark Callahan, Associate Superintendent of Instructional Services.
And I give a lot of credit to this team, especially Tim and James, who's the grant writer, who's really tried to capture all this and put it in some form to make sense. So what we're going to do is, before we get going, let me just, not that they're questions, but if you've read it, what areas sort of trigger some either anxiety or interest in this petition? I'm just sort of get a check to see where we go. Governance, one. Is there anything in there that you say I'm kind of really interested in? If there's not, we're just going to go.
The line about we want flexibility about changing the 65% minimum budget to the classroom.
Okay.
I just was curious, so where did that
come from?
How did that change when you make the decision?
Got it.
Like
Got it. So 65% rule, one of those waivers, specific waivers. Anything else?
It would be very helpful to me to see contrast and comparison between how it is now and what it would be then. What the advantages are, the
And I don't know if you're going to see it quite that current system, next system, and that's a really good point, but hopefully we'll be able to tease some of that piece out.
I guess that's really one of the things about flexibility. Does that mean flexibility in evaluation of our teachers?
We're gonna get to that.
Okay, good.
Remember flexibility, so you know, Tim can explain, flexibility is mostly around Title 20 regs. Title 20 are all the regulations that get passed. It says we can't do House bills or laws, local, state, or federal, but we'll talk about that. But it really talks about Department of Ed regulations. The role of would that be the governance board? Okay, role of the governance board. So we're talking about that. Okay.
I guess you're talking about things that were online. I didn't read what was online because I haven't seen anything in the newspaper lately.
Okay.
So you must have some idea of what you would like to change, what regulations you'd like to change.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. How would that be? One of the things you ought to know, and I think I'm starting to get into the presentation, unless there's something else, is that what this does, it gives you the broadest waivers that you want. So you don't have to say it in your application. What this allows you to do is this says I can request that waiver. Kind of gives you a card to say I want to waive this. Yeah, I mean we give some examples, but a charter system is right carte blanche, gives you all the waivers under Title 20 that you can get.
Well, to follow up on that, I'm not sure I want to give you carte blanche on anything you want to change. I'd like to know what you have in mind before.
We'll talk about it. Yeah, we'll talk about it. But ultimately, the waiver change has to go through our board. You know what I mean? We can talk about what some of those things are. Okay. Tim, you want to go through and...
Okay. I'm going to try to stand here by the microphone because I used to think I had a loud voice, but people always tell me that they can't hear me, so I'm going to stand up here. I'll rely also, Mark Kevin here knows DOE rules really well. James Barlowman, our grant writer's gone to all of the training sessions about the ins and outs of writing a charter or I-squared application. So at one point they may jump in to correct me, make sure I'm not misrepresenting anything, but it's kind of been a team effort. What I'm going to do is, on our website, you will see a link, and I'll show you at the end of this presentation, where you can actually see the current draft of our application as it exists right now, but it changes, and every time we change it or modify it based on feedback, we update the footer with the new date. You'll also see a copy of this presentation, and so we've kind of designed this presentation to be like the Cliff Notes version of the application. So the application is 50 pages. We're limited to 50 pages, and we're pushing that right now. So this is kind of the Cliff Notes version. That's on the website, and then there's a feedback form on the website. And in that form, you can actually click and get a link of the current draft. So that's kind of how you can approach this after tonight. You can go back and see all the information we talk about, because I know we're going to hit a lot of things really quickly tonight. So feel free to go back to that, and I'll show you that at the end of the presentation. So let me turn this on, and we'll get started. So like Dr. Lanu said, the first thing to understand is this is a law, and it was mandated by law that by this June, all school systems have to make a decision which they would like to go forward with. And it's really a model to change. It's really about school improvement and school reform. You have to decide as a school district, local board of education members actually have to decide if districts want to go and become what they call investing in educational excellence, which is I-squared, which is actually a high performance student achievement contract with the Governor's Office of Student Achievement. Then you can choose to be a charter system, which again focuses on how you govern, how you share governance with school councils, which they are now calling governance teams. And then the third way is you can label yourself as a status quo district. That's the labeling in the law, that you have to identify yourself as a status quo district, meaning that you're not going to change you're not going to choose any kind of a reform model, so to speak. When you become a charter system, what it means is you implement innovative practices. You have to identify those. In order to implement innovative practices, you're allowed to waive certain Board of Education rules, and they give you broad flexibility in what you want to waive. So there's where the waivers come in. You have to commit to some academic or other targets. You have to commit to some academic targets that they designate for you. But then you can have other targets, and we've listed a few other ones in our application. You especially have to define input and decision-making authority and how that applies to what they call local school governance teams, which are teams that represent the school and the community. So those are kind of the major points of what it means to be a charter system. And they've said after going forward next year, they will not grant any waivers to school systems for any other types of thing. And right now, school systems do get waivers. We can waive things like class size. That's been a popular one. A lot of school districts have done in these budget times. There are certain teacher certification waivers that you're allowed to waive right now. So there are quite a few different waivers, rules you can waive. Your local board has to ask the state board to waive those rules, right, and they bring those to the state board of education meetings.
Could I say, this is only a projection, a thought on my part. Obviously, there's a strong push to move to one of the two models, I-squared or let's just call it the way it is, and charter system. And obviously, they didn't put status quo because they thought that was exciting. Clarke County Schools never changes, never will. It's not sort of a byline. I think there is at least a possible fear here that as we move forward and those that say status quo, will there be more regulations that just tighten you and put you in a box? That's only a possibility, but it's a possibility.
this slide is just to show you that we've got a timeline that we're working on. We want some community public meeting hearings. You know, it's an input process, and we're revising this application as we get feedback all along the way. We're even trying to work out, Dr. Lanu's trying to work out a joint meeting where he works with some of the unified government commissioners and our Board of Education members to talk about how this might affect the whole community of Athens, Clarke County. So here's some key concepts about our charter application. We think these are important to know that under the charter system, our school district, we really want to change our name to become the Athens Clarke Community School District rather than saying it's the Clarke County School District. We want to emphasize the idea that our application is unique because we're really trying to focus on these governance teams working within the whole community that feeds the school rather than just the governance team and they're worried about just the school. The application, you'll see the word neighborhood. In our application, when we say neighborhood, we're really talking about the attendance zone for the school that local school governance team serves. And we know really that attendance zone is made up of multiple neighborhoods, but we're kind of using that term generically. It's not about attendance zones and changing our attendance zones. We don't plan to change the attendance zones. That's not part of this charter district application. Community school, when you see that, we're using that term to talk about how we want this charter framework to work at. The whole point of our charter application is we're trying to align the needs of students, families, teachers in the neighborhood around the common goal of improving the success of the young people that attend that school and growing future leaders for that school.
Could I just add to that, because there's so much in here, sort of trying to package it away that makes sense. When we talk about community, our application, you have to know, does not usurp the board's authority under the Constitution decision making. The board functions as the board. You know what I mean? With policies and budgets and etc. That does not change. What it does do, or what it does not do, it does not also create independent schools all over the county that are doing really different things. You know what I mean? And so our schools could easily become inequitable. I have not been a proponent of choice. I've been a proponent that our county is so small that one of the strengths is that this whole organization is driven by the district plan. So the district plan of the expectations that have to be constant in every school must be constant in every school. What it does mean is that local governance is what else do they need to help fulfill the needs that are defined in the strategic plan in their neighborhood. I mean, so what we've said is, ours is probably the only one in the state where we said, if you can understand it, our charter is to build capacity in our neighborhoods to support the local schools that in a way that all students achieve, not only in that school in the district. It's not about changing all these different programs in schools, even though there will be some autonomy for that. So
as we go through this next section, you'll notice we have to, according to the guidelines of the hear this, and they said we have to build what we call the case around why we're considering moving this areas where we focus on what kind of innovations will we try to do, and can we foresee the need for any waivers of state rules. Then we have to talk about performance expectations. They have set some that they call beating the odds. And then they also talk about that you can have locally developed district goals and performance expectations. Then the last area we talk about in the framework of your application is what are you doing with these local school governance teams? What areas of authority are you granting them? What's the timeline? How are you going to train them? What's the membership going to look like? You know, are you considering any draft bylaws? So as you go through this, you'll kind of see it all falls into these three areas: the case, the expectations for performance, and local school governance.
And I want you to know we've taken great exception, but we can't change the language that beating the odds is just a horrific way in our minds that we want to describe how we challenge our kids at work. We just didn't have a choice. This isn't about odds. I'm sorry. It's about children.
So the background, why ours is unique, we think, and James and I have actually looked at a lot of applications, and honestly, a lot of the applications we've seen, I think we have 22 school districts in the state right now that have already had charter applications approved, is that about right? Out of 180 in Georgia. And a lot of the ones we've seen really don't look like there's any change in how business is done. In fact, some of the goals have been things like improved math. We're going to implement a math curriculum or a new math program. There's one that the big innovation is to teach Portuguese in all schools. It just doesn't seem like there's a big change. And we wanted to really make ours, if we're going to do this, unique to Clarke County and empowering to Clarke County. So a couple of things here is our application is aligned. The innovations that we would say in our charter align with our strategic plan. It's just a new way of pushing forward on our strategic plan that our local education has approved. We do establish local school governance teams, and our goal is to make them broadly representative of the community schools and neighborhoods that they serve. We were trying to define the role of governance teams to have responsibility, and the major change is that they're going to have more responsibility and input and some authority in actual making school improvement decisions and implementing school improvement initiatives. So,
and I would say this, when you talk about local governments, I mean, it's your greatest strength and it's your greatest concern. It kind of goes both pieces. Navigate through what that looks like.
Really important, because in our initial governance meeting with some members of the community, we talked to early in September. Two big ideas that came out of that presented at every table as we walked around. There were a lot of concerns that everything we know about charter, very many times, says you have charter schools that actually end up serving the needs of certain groups of kids and really kind of disenfranchise other groups of kids. That was a perception in that room that night. And they said, we don't want to go there if this is where we end up. We don't want it to be about disenfranchising. We want being charter to be about unifying. So it was real important that we wanted to talk about developing a community school's ability to take advantage of innovations through the local school governance teams. The other big piece was strengthening community schools using the unique characteristics of each neighborhood, or the attendance zone, the people that attend that school. They said it should really be about not just the governance team focusing on the school, but the governance team focusing on the needs of that neighborhood, that whole attendance zone. Dr. Williams?
Yeah, Tim, and I guess there's a couple questions. I want to try not to detract us too far because I got to get through the presentation. But are there any specific questions to the case? You know what I mean? Not the logistics of the case, but the actual language of the case. Okay.
So, in the case, we often have to define, so what were these governance teams focused on? Or what's your charter district going to focus on? And we said our priority areas are right here. We want to first strengthen community schools and neighborhoods through strong collaborations with parents, districts, and neighborhood members to support student academic growth, social economic development, and physical well-being. So in other words, it's just not about test scores. It's about improving the education and improving the welfare of the children of that school, and not just doing it through the school, but doing it through the community.
It's a part of it. These are, by the way, these are the 3 of the 4 goals in the current strategic plan. So these aren't something that were just generated for this.
The second area would be to create dynamic learning experiences for all students, to close the achievement gap and prepare them for college and careers. And then the last thing, which we've labeled as a district level, is to select, support, retain, and evaluate a highly dedicated, talented, and diverse professional workforce. And really, it's the first 2 areas that the governance teams will mostly work through. And that community group we first talked to in September, that was the second big piece that they came away with that night. They said, these governance teams are going to require a lot of energy from the members. We want their work to be focused. We want their work to be powerful and to mean something to the school and to the children in that school, so and the community. So those 2 areas are where we wanted the work of governance teams to really focus. That third area was another thing that came out of that meeting, which was, if we're really going to be innovative, We're going to need to have new ways to evaluate the work of governance teams, the work of strengthening communities, creating dynamic learning experiences. So to do that, we cannot get bogged down with implementing the myriad rules and regulations, really, honestly, of the teacher and leader evaluation system the state's adopted this year.
You're going to see that. I just want to make note, Dr. Friedman is here in this area. Just sort of look right over the top is our Associate Superintendent for Human Resources, Student Services.
So really, that's going to be a district level piece we have to work with the governance teams on. So those are our priority areas. You have to define your priority areas. So really, if it doesn't fit in these areas here, then the governance teams won't be addressing it a whole lot. They're going to focus their work. We had quite a few members in that September meeting that actually were members of school councils, and they said, you know, it's a big commitment of time. So we want to have these governance teams feel like they've accomplished something positive for students and for the community when they finish the work at the end of the year. So here are some sample innovations. You have to list innovations in your plan. So for each of those areas, here are some sample innovations we listed. You can see more listed in the actual application. But in terms of strengthening community neighborhoods, these are some examples of some things you could do as a governance team. You could say this year we're going to focus on expanding outreach services. We're going to focus on developing birth to 5 literacy programs for the students that are coming into this school, that will be coming into that school as kindergartners in another year or 2 or 3. So again, governance teams could pick one of these to focus on. We're not expecting them to address all of them.
Let me add this, but what this really means is that the local governance team has to determine in this area what the needs is of their neighborhoods. Because our neighborhoods, as we define them, are all different. Barrow is different than Chase, is different than Stroud, is different than Barnett Shoals and Witt and all of the above. So that the local government has to decide what is it that we need that's going to help our schools close the achievement gap.
Second area, creating dynamic learning experiences. These are some things that you could do. Governance team might focus on some of these people. Establishing a support system for students who've dropped out, need to come back. You can see a governance team in high school working with that. There's one, utilizing volunteer presence in schools, recruiting neighbors to serve as mentors. I mean, you can read through all of them. Enabling parents to be able to be better at using digital tools with their students. And there are other pieces there. There are other innovations we listed too. We just put a few on this presentation.
Let me give you sort of an example just to push it. It sounds the same, but it's very different. In our current technical programs, and we don't have as many of the CTA courses, but it would make sense for us that if we're really preparing students to go into a particular field, it would make more sense for us to contract with that business to actually teach the course on site and actually get the training on site than it is for us to try to hire someone to replicate it in school and then ship you off somewhere else. So we're not talking about certified teacher. We're trying to do something very, very different in terms of getting your credential. Might be an example.
In the last area, this is the one that the district would work on, some of the innovations. First off, the actual law that is guiding the charter district application actually says that if you become a charter district and a principal vacancy comes open, the local school governance team has to have a role in giving input in selecting the new principal for the school.
And by the way, we do that now. I mean, what happens is every school, actually, that whole process starts with HR in concert with school level teams. They do all the screening of applications. The difference is they send candidates to me. I then screen them and decide, am I going to get one? Sometimes I've chosen one, sometimes I've sent it back and said no. And then ultimately, though, the board hires them. The board always hires personnel. But the recommendation has to come through the superintendent.
The last big one here, we are actually putting into our application, and we refined the language actually just recently based on some feedback from principals, was we're actually going to ask that we waive the implementation of some key processes in the TEKS and LEAKS teacher evaluation system. And I've got another slide in a little bit that will give you some specifics, but that system has created some loss of instructional time in terms of administering surveys to students, some things about SLO assessments to students. We're really asking to change that we're going to, because we feel like we're going to need some innovative ways and put some energy into some other methods of assessing innovations rather than just.
So let me go out on a limb here a little bit. It's pretty clear that this was a state law and how it's defined. So there were some that would say you can't put that part of your charter. And really what I will say to you, and I will say to all the way through our application, if this supports our innovations, then let us go and create our box that we need, because that's what you asked us to do. We'll see. I'm just saying, this one, it's got some other strings attached probably, but it's the right thing to do.
Then we talked about waivers. So here are some ideas about how our governance team might utilize and might ask our local board members to request a waiver from certain state rules that the State Board of Education. For example, we have a thing called early intervention programs, EIP programs in elementary schools. It's a way of providing extra teachers and extra services in reading or math. I'm an assessment and accountability guy. I jump into curriculum, but not all the time. But right now, you have to deliver certain models. You may be limits on that you have to do a model where this teacher has to see these students for X number of minutes a day. And maybe we want to see fewer minutes, but use some of that time after school. Or maybe we want to have a different way to put students in. Right now, there are students that we'd like to put into EIP that we're not able to and serve them because of certain regulations about how you have to identify them. So we could ask to waive some of the processes you would use to put
really what EIP is, you have to use a state model to get funding. And what we're saying, we should get funding and have the flexibility to use a model that works best for us.
Second piece, here's another example. These are some actual state rules up here. These are rules that all deal with how you give credit and how you provide credit with certified staff in the high school. And so there's some ideas here of ways we could change how we could give people off-site attendance credit for virtual programs, internships, and apprenticeships. Right now, if you do an apprenticeship, you get credit as an elective. But let's face it, if you need a fourth math, you've already passed 3 maths, and you've got an internship in an accounting firm, maybe that should be able to count as your fourth core math class.
Or computer program, or
that's right,
whatever.
in computer programming. Why are we limited that way? So if you really want us to be innovative, so you could ask for a waiver for that. You know, we have a lot of students that are taking computers home. So why would if they go home and complete all their work when they're sick one day, why should we have to count them absent if they've done their work through a virtual program?
So think of it this way. Right now, we only get money for courses that are identified by the state. We line them up. And we want to have the ability, by the way, to get into some creative design of courses that we think would work for our kids. That would meet standards, but they don't have that number and that title, and that's not how they're organized. Does that make sense? So it would give us some ability to really be creative.
How would each of these innovations be designed for our system?
Well, here's how would they be designed for this school? Yeah. Here's what we're saying. Ultimately, the board, it's like this. The board ultimately has to approve that waiver. So there's checks and balances. It has to go to the board. But we haven't figured out all the processes, because there's part of me that says we want local governance team to decide what they want, and I don't want to prescribe what that exact look like, because then it's already set in stone. If we're going to be creative, we will be designing processes for new courses. That's upon us. I don't have them today because I think they really ought to be a little bit more organic. I do know there's checks and balances, but we're careful not to identify what programs and what courses and be specifics, because I want to wait to see what governance teams do. Let me go one more, and I want to keep going.
May I ask?
Yeah.
Then what about innovation coming from one school for one school versus the whole, all the elements?
So here's what we have to be careful of. It's a really good question. What we have to be careful of is, you have an innovation. You have to justify how that innovation supports your school district and closes the achievement gap. So it isn't something I just want because I like it for some kids. You have to go to the closing the achievement gap. And we have to decide whether that deviates, by the way, from the district plan. For example, if we have a reading program that's for all students, a local governance team can't say, I don't want your reading program, I want ours. Now they may say, I want an additional reading program because we got some gaps. But the district that stays the same stays the same. But the risk here is we got to get local schools that autonomy to make some decisions. Otherwise, it's not local governance. They also have to follow policy.
Everybody's going to be raised, but everyone will be raised up, not just this one.
You know, and that's a really good question. Here it is. People would say, well, some already have a capacity for governance and some do not. And you know what we're saying? Those that do not have it, we need to ensure we get it to them. That's how we're going to build support in our communities. Do you know what I mean? And you're right, we still run that risk, but our goal is we're not going to be able to bring any greater equalization to our neighborhoods unless we empower them to make some decisions. I'll do one more and then I'll keep going. One more. Yeah.
I want to understand, if you've got a school that's failed, and you give that failed school government power, how is that going to be good for the system?
First of all is you're going to see what we're giving people for governance. First of all, you have to define what failing is. Do you know what I mean? Can I hold that thought? And the reason why is the district has the responsibility to deal with schools that are not performing in its district plan. But it doesn't say I'm going to go to the local governance team and says, listen, we got this for the district. What are you doing? I hold impact checks with leadership teams right now. I'm going to the governance team and superintendent, and I say, what are you doing? And holding you accountable. So we have a joint effort. I mean, that's what we're looking at. But our district strategic plan is for performance for everybody. So it's not like everybody's going to be doing something so different. Expectations are the same. We'll come back to more if I can be more clear.
This third one is just, this kind of lists some of the specific things we're going to waive about this new teacher evaluation system. What we're saying is that we want to develop a student growth metric for teachers and leaders that utilizes multiple measures. Right now, our teachers are assessed basically on one measurement, and it's either a standardized test score from the new Georgia state test, or it's from a test that the state's asking us to administer called the SLO assessment. We want to be able to use multiple measures that are already embedded in instruction instead of having to layer additional tests on top of that. So we're really asking the state to not require something called an SLO assessment. The other piece is that we want to waive the administration of two things. We're asking students to take a lot of surveys that we're required to do for teacher evaluation, and really we had some school improvement surveys that we thought were very effective at giving leadership teams of schools some feedback about how the needs of the school and where to go. We'd rather use those in a more holistic